So, Piero, I'm going to try to clarify by reading a couple sentences from Corey's book, Selfhood and Authenticity. So Heidegger has, when talking about intentionality, has distinguished the intentio and the intentum, or the act of perceiving and the thing perceived. And so, playing off of that, Corey writes, "The different intentional tissues by which we inhere in the world can be characterized as lines of force manifesting two poles or ends, the intentio and the intentum. For example, there are acts of touching, or intentio, and objects touched, or intentum, activities of thinking, intentio, and things thought about, intentum, activities of seeing, intentio, and things seen, intentum, etc. In general, various intentional activities, according to their mode of operation, manifest particular world profiles of their intended objects. This discussion of directing itself toward, which is what intentionality means, should not lead us to assume overly subjectivistic or overly objectivistic notions of intentionality, as if world were a concept, or something that the subject simply produces or manufactures, or as if the world were fundamentally pre-given, and the subject, already detached, merely discovers it." So, my point wasn't to separate the act of perceiving and the thing perceived. The process of intentionality is a constant transaction between these two poles. They're never separate. They imply, they co-emerge with one another. They imply one another. And the reason I don't think we can look to the brain as an explanation of consciousness is that is to separate the intentional process, such that we're only paying attention to the intentum, to the brain as perceived, and ignoring the fact that the brain is more than a thing perceived. It's first of all, it's embodied, it's in a body, and it's in a world, and that these all they come forth together, and that it's only excessive abstraction that leads us to think that consciousness were somehow something inside of the skull. Your point about relativity is well taken. I'm not even really debating that. I think my real point lies elsewhere, which is that we can't assume that there is a world out there. I mean, I know you're a skeptic, and your epistemology is not to assume that there actually is an external world independent of us. But in attempting to explain consciousness, it seems that you're assuming this is the case. You're assuming that there is a pre-given world, and that consciousness can be explained or derived from that. Whereas I would say this very idea of a pre-given world is an abstraction derived from our intentional embeddedness in the world that's always shifting or transacting between these two poles of an act of perceiving and a thing perceived. So hopefully that clarifies a little bit, maybe, I hope.